Welcome to the Manufacturing Austin Podcast. I'm Kevin Fincher, the President and CEO of the Austin Regional Manufacturers Association. And today we have Bret Boyd from Sustainment. And we're going to have a great discussion about some of the solutions that Sustainment is bringing into the manufacturing supply chain. Before we get started, I'd like to thank our title sponsor, Texas Mutual, and their longtime support of ARMA and everything that we've done. So thank you, Texas Mutual, for continuing to support our thought leadership series through the podcast. I'd also like to thank the Tribe at Mylan Media, formerly MFG Tribe, for doing the production of the podcast. Thank you. So with that, we're going to kick this off. Bret, I'm going to let you introduce yourself in a minute, but for our audience that's out there today, I think it's important to recognize that we're filming this the day after we had the tariff announcements that came out yesterday. So it's been a very busy evening and a very busy day, and I think that will play well into the conversation that we have today as we try and sort out that. But I don't know, Bret, we're not going to spend an hour talking about tariffs. It's beyond our capacity to do that. But I do think that we have some things to talk about, how that will impact reshoring of manufacturing, which is the space that you guys are in. So with that, let's kick it off. What do you say? So, Bret, introduce yourself.
Yeah, look, I appreciate it, and it's good to be here. We certainly do live in interesting times. There was a lot of announcements made yesterday and earlier this week that we're all still trying to digest and operationalize here. But no, this is an interesting time to be in this business. So yeah, my name is Bret Boyd. I am a technology entrepreneur here. So I co-founded and serve as the CEO of Sustainment. So we are an Austin-based technology company. We build software and AI to essentially help make it easier for people to find and get work done with American manufacturers.
All right. So we're going to talk in depth about Sustainment. What's the website?
Sustainment.com.
All right. We'll hit that again before we're done. But let's talk about you personally a little bit, because you have an interesting background that before you came into being an entrepreneur. So tell us a little bit about your background. You were in the Army, you were a Ranger. What led you to pursue that and decide to enlist and serve?
So we're getting personal here.
That's what we try to do.
No, look, I appreciate it. So I did undergrad at West Point. I actually was a senior at West Point when the towers went down, which was kind of interesting in the sense that we went there prior to the global war on terror and happened to graduate into that. And so, was an infantry officer. Ended up deploying 4 times to Iraq in the 2003 to 2007 timeframe. And look, you're a veteran as well. I think you know that we are all a product of our experiences, for better and for worse. And I've been out of the military and into this kind of startup and company building world here since 2007. And I actually think a lot of the lessons that you learn and a lot of the things that you practice as a small unit leader in the military are super applicable. I mean, at the end of the day, like, we are building teams and solving problems here, and that's kind of what I cut my teeth on in the infantry. And yeah, was able to be in the 75th Ranger Regiment, work with some really, really talented men in that experience, and it's again a privilege to be able to build on that foundation to do what we're after today.
All right. And well, thank you for your service. What was the toughest part of Ranger training?
Oh, gosh, I don't even know. I mean, so, look,
Is it a blur? We just push it out of the mind?
Look, there are a lot of guys that come after this and they obsess around food and not getting enough food and not getting enough sleep and so on. I would just say it's a mix of all of it. I think you actually have a benefit going into it as a West Point grad, because you have kind of a cohort of your friends and colleagues that you go through the school with. And so, I think the more formative experiences were actually in combat in the Middle East, candidly. So I look back at those more than I look back at some of the training experiences. But no, there's a bunch of great Ranger School stories out there.
Yeah. All right. And what do you think was really the biggest lesson you learned? You had mentioned team building and leading teams, but anything else from your time in service?
Yeah, look, so one of the fallacies, and I have this conversation a lot with folks, but one of the fallacies of military leaders is that it's this, do what I say, and it's this real like command-driven, top-down, leaders in charge. Everybody else are kind of robots doing what they're supposed to do, and it's just 100% not like that, right? The men and women that I serve with, are some of the most talented people that I've ever worked with, and I actually think success in that environment is actually empowering leaders to be excellent. So as a ground force commander in a Ranger regiment in combat, you're almost coordinating all of these assets. You have these great leaders leading squads, you've got helicopters, you've got, aerial assets that you're trying to coordinate, and you're almost playing like the offensive coordinator as opposed to the, hey, follow me, I'm guiding every play. And that idea of like really identifying what people are good at and letting them run, and then being able to quickly like leverage the strengths of the organization to kind of follow that is really one of the principles of the special operations community. This is a world where non-commissioned officers they're all excellent. They have an extremely competitive process to get where they are. So the ability to trust and empower those folks, I actually think, is the determinant of successful leadership in the military. And to flip this to company building, it's the same thing. At the end of the day, like we've brought a ton of venture capital in this business. We have a big team. I've got software developers. I have, AI engineers. I have sales professionals that cover both our defense and commercial, but we have all of these different functions. And the goal in this is actually to hire people that are better than you at all of those, and then figure out how to equip and coordinate them so that you can kind of get after the overall mission of the business. And that actually feels very similar to pulling a strike force together where you have all these different skill sets. And, and that might be overplaying this a little bit, but that general philosophy of like, get the right people and let them run and then give them the support that they need is kind of the foundation of how I look at the world.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And it is, ARMA is a very veteran-forward organization. We really want to support the veteran community and get more veterans involved in manufacturing. There are so many veteran-led manufacturers that are members of ARMA, and so it's exciting to see VC and PE finally coming back into that military-industrial space where they had been absent for so long. And again, we're in a unique place being here in Austin with Army Futures Command and everything that's happening, the innovation and DIU and all that. So exciting times. And so that kind of, I want to get back to that and the seed for sustainment and how that came about. But after you were finished serving and you came out, talk about your transition out of the military and into the civilian life and what that was like. What were the unexpecteds? Was it an easy transition? Where did that go?
To try to answer that in a way that I think is maybe helpful for the audience, that so I went into a consulting business, and then I went from there kind of into the startup world, right? So I had a couple of steps, and one of the things that I really struggled with when I got out was this sense of mission. At the end of the day, like I find that I am not motivated. I'm not a big financially motivated guy. I've got a very I'm very comfortable with kind of the middle class house, the middle class car. Like striving for that is not really what drives me. But I need to care. Like I actually need to feel like I'm working on something that both serves and helps other people, and that is a mission that I find value in. And so that was actually hard. So getting into a business, and one of the companies I went into was, bought by private equity, and you kind of go through this chain of like, oh, we're actually owned by these guys who are invested in by these, and trying to like work through this chain of like, who actually like, owns the identity of what we're getting after. Like that was the hardest part for me. And so that's actually why I gravitate towards this kind of smaller, earlier stage, and this idea of like building stuff and being part of the economy of builders, as opposed to somebody coming into businesses to help them operate when they're kind of further down the journey. And I see a lot of friends and colleagues that have go through that same process where they're like, look, I'm enjoying learning new things. I'm enjoying doing what I'm doing, but like I miss the mission. I miss the mission where everybody is fully aligned. We have, the incentives are obvious. We're all trying to serve the country and get after this. And that's something that I'm actually trying to build with this business here.
Yeah, no, that resonates because I've heard that from others, but even for myself, took me a long time to be able to do that because I came out of consulting. I spent 27 years in a consulting practice, but one of the reasons of coming over to ARMA was really that purpose driven mission, if you will, right? But I love it. It's what keeps me going every single day is to try and help stand up manufacturing. And it's also a way, ironically, to come back around after all these years and be able to really help support the industrial base in the U.S. military, just doing it on the civilian side. So I appreciate that insight.
Yeah, and to drill into that a little bit, like manufacturing is so important to this country. I mean, if you really look at like American history here, like part of the fundamental identity of America is the nation that builds. And I think that there is so much, in addition to like great jobs and great skills and so on, that there is just integrity in actually being part of the value chain and having the value chain of like things that we interact with every day, like having a closeness of that to our lives that I really think is fundamental to manufacturing. And it's why I think this is such an interesting space and why I am so passionate and enthusiastic about the things that I see happening to kind of bring that back into our lives as Americans in a more meaningful way. And I think we're in the first or second inning of the next 30-year secular shift towards localized manufacturing supply chains, and it's something I think is actually going to be deeply good for us as a people.
Yeah, we talk about this all the time, right? What really made America great was that industrial base and that we made things for the world. And it used to have pride in that, right? We took pride in making things. And then we had this globalization phenomenon that happened in the late 70s, early 80s. And by the end of the 80s decade, it really opened up and everybody started offshoring because they were looking for low cost. And we just, for 3 decades have stripped out manufacturing from the U.S., from the training, switched that gear. So, to me, it's been an alarm call for a long time, but COVID really helped accelerate that as it exposed our supply chain. So the other thing is we look at China right now, and we've talked about the fact that China is manufacturing half the world right now, and what they tried to do and how they approach that. And so, rather than being an economic adversary, we're starting to have a military adversary, and we know what's happening over there. So it's absolutely critical right now. One of the things in the tariff discussion was China's shipbuilding capacity and what they're doing in shipbuilding, which is they're cranking out more ships in a year than I think the U.S. has built since World War II, I believe is one of those facts. You can fact check me on that, but our shipyards, we're not cranking out shipyards right now. We have a problem building submarines and trying to keep up and put submarines because we don't have enough people in the submarine shipyards. And so Blue Forge Alliance is out there trying to help solve that industrial base problem. So again, it is an exciting time as this country has woken up to that. We need to rebrand what manufacturing is and get parents on board with that and show these careers. And so that's just a personal plug for what we're trying to do and bring it back. And so, again, I appreciate the mission that you guys are on and where you're at and helping as we bring that supply chain back and build that out. So let's kind of pivot into then the seed of Sustainment and how that came about. How did you get involved with it? Where was the initial need? Because I believe it came from the Air Force, and talk about that genesis.
Yeah, so we founded this business in early 2020. So we're about 5 years into the journey here, and I've had the privilege to start or lead a couple of businesses, and specifically enterprise software businesses with a heavy focus on data. So I kind of took that background and, being veterans and paying a lot of attention to national priorities here, it was pretty interesting to see, in the 2017, 2018, 2019 timeframe, this idea of like the shrinking industrial base really starting to be a narrative that you'd hear out of the DoD. Right, so we're listening to this. This is the Defense Logistics Agency was talking about a 40% reduction in small and medium-sized businesses in their supply chain. I think dating back to 2016 or something along those lines. And so we started to look at this and say, why in the world is that the case? So we started the process of investigation, my co-founder and I, around talking to these different manufacturing groups in the DoD to say why is this hard? Like we live in Central Texas. There's a huge manufacturing ecosystem here. One of the largest consumers of manufacturing in the DoD is up outside of Oklahoma City at Tinker Air Force Base. We had these conversations and said, look, why don't you drive down the I-35 corridor and go have conversations with all of these great manufacturers that work in oil and gas and these other industries and invite them to be part of your supply chain. I'm sure they would be there, and we got into this, and there's just so much friction around who are the suppliers. We're hearing all of this from the DoD side. Which really led us to say, that's interesting. It seems like that should be easy, that the largest buyer of machine parts in the United States, the DoD, should be able to say, hey, we're looking for suppliers, please come to us. But it wasn't hard, or it wasn't easy, excuse me. And, so we pulled that, and then you go start talking to these manufacturing suppliers and say, hey, why aren't you working with the DoD? And they said, look, there are so many barriers to entry here that make it difficult for them to know who we are, for us to present our capabilities to them. So we said, okay, that's interesting. Then we continued to follow that thread and started to talk to some of these commercial OEMs, commercial original equipment manufacturers, to say, how do you find manufacturers, and how do you go through that process? Is that hard for you? And we really stepped back and looked at this and said, look, there is a fundamental problem here around manufacturing in the country. This supplier discovery issue is extremely difficult. And as we looked at it, it's the world of trying to navigate, different supplier websites. There's a lot of personal networks associated with this. And there's just a lot of, I don't want to say non-technology enabled workflows, but maybe technology workflows that haven't fully been optimized by the most modern technologies. And there are a lot of these, large, high-friction B2B industries in the country that haven't fully gone through these transformations yet. But that was the original idea of looking at that and saying, okay, there's something here. It needs to be easier to find and get work done with U.S. manufacturers. There are platforms like the Alibabas in the world that actually make it easy to go find manufacturers on the other side of the world. But in the U.S., this is all happening in silos, offline, through relationships. And those relationships are incredibly important. But there has to be a better way, because the other observation in this is that there is a ton of excellence and extra capacity in U.S. manufacturing that is underutilized as a result of it actually being difficult to find and get engaged with these manufacturers. And I think this friction in getting new opportunities actually is the upstream issue that leads to the difficulty in hiring people with great wages, with investing in robotics and cobots and advanced technologies at the shop floor level. And the idea is that if we can make it easier for, again, people to find and actually do real business with a broader network of U.S. suppliers, that we're going to be able to unlock this thing, and that it's going to be something that will actually help the 13 million men and women that work in manufacturing in the country. So that led us to incorporate the business. We actually incorporated this as a public benefit corporation, specifically anchored around we want to be the company that is for the small and medium-sized manufacturer, which, by the way, is the overwhelming majority of manufacturing capacity in the United States. And so we were fortunate to get picked up in one of the early innovation programs by the Air Force through that AFWERX Small Business Innovative Research Program. We actually went through their they've got a phase 1 and a phase 2, and then one where they actually provide capital to match with venture capital investment. And we've been very fortunate to go through that process with the Air Force and with a few other DoD groups. But we did really essentially, looked at the problem holistically and then said, let's go solve it for the DoD so that we can reduce barriers to entry for manufacturing suppliers into the DoD, which will help us kind of reach into the DoD's supply chain. And we've been off to the races from there.
All right. Well, so when I first stepped into this role, one of ARMA's pillars is networking, and part of that networking is really trying to connect supply chain, because we always get inbound calls. I'm looking for somebody who can do this part for me. I don't have the capacity to do that, or can you do somebody that can do heat treating, or I need a special metal band, something like that. And so it was clearly a need that we do it the old-fashioned way. Okay, let me reach out to some of our other members and give you some referrals. And in this age of automation and software, I'm like, why can't this be automated? So my idea had been, okay, let's create that engine that we can put through the ARMA website and really direct people into that so that they could do a search. And I was doing it a very old-fashioned way. I'm not a coder. I had BASIC and COBOL back when I was in college, but I don't do a lot of that this day. And I was trying to think, how can I make that happen, which is kind of the path that led me to find you guys. I was at Arma Futures Command at one of the presentations, and I met Joseph Kopser, and he was talking about this, and he said, you got to go meet Bret, and this is how we got connected. And I was like, oh, this is really cool. I don't have to invent it. It's already been invented, right? So this, you were solving the problem that we had identified, and it's not just the DoD, right? It's where it started, but it's across all manufacturing. And so this is really, I was so excited to find Sustainment. And then it was, well, we got to get the word out, right? We got to have people be on the platform, right? It doesn't work if you don't have suppliers on the platform. Your OEMs, need to have a nice base on that. So I'm happy that we finally found our way to each other. But it's not just ARMA, right? This is a national platform that's rolling out, right? And you have relationships with a lot of the MEPs, the Manufacturing Extension Partnership. So let me, for those that aren't familiar, you should be familiar with that. The MEP network was funded back in the 80s. It came through the Department of Commerce down through NIST, and it was really meant to help support small manufacturers across the country. So today, in all 50 states, there is at least one MEP in the state. Some states have multiple MEPs, and it's an extremely important program that helps support against small manufacturers, and ARMA has been a beneficiary of that. In fact, ARMA would not be in existence today without TMAC, which is the Texas Manufacturing Extension Program, and they help seed ARMA and create this ecosystem that we are able to help. They provide significant training to us throughout the year, lean training, supervisor training. They help support cybersecurity and a lot of things that are going on. So the MEP program is extremely valuable. And as we are having this podcast real time, we got a surprise announcement on Monday that through the DOGE program, that funding for the MEP program was going to cease and that it would be taken away. So we're going to be talking about that a little bit more outside of this podcast, but it's an extremely important issue right now if we want to support manufacturing. But I want to pivot this back then into our conversation because Sustainment is aligned with, I know that you're trying to get to that point where you can say half of the MEPs. I think you're close, but can you talk a little bit about your involvement through the MEP program and how you're trying to spread Sustainment now nationally?
Yeah, let me do this in two ways. Let me explain kind of how support organizations, including yours, candidly, fit into kind of our business architecture. Let me explain how our business works. And then I definitely have a perspective on the MEP program that I'd love to share. So the flywheel that we've created is, we've identified that there are a bunch of great manufacturing support organizations who are actually like in the fight with manufacturers. These are associations like your organizations. These are the MEPs that are funded through the Department of Commerce. There are the Apex Accelerator program that exists through the DoD. There are governors' task forces. There are like national associations, and I actually think those organizations are extremely valuable as part of this overall solution. So we've identified those as groups that we want to partner with. So we've developed essentially a relationship where we provide technology to those groups that allows them to see who are my manufacturers, where are they, I can provide services to them, where are areas of maybe overcapacity or undercapacity where we can help kind of drive investment in the right areas. So we give them software, and in exchange for that, they help us recruit suppliers. We're free for suppliers. This is actually part of our commitment as a public benefit corporation. We're free for suppliers. Suppliers can join our software. They can create a profile, say, this is who I am. This is what I do. These are the certifications that I have. These are the, even getting down to like the capital equipment that I have. And those manufacturing suppliers then make us valuable to basically buyers. Right? And we have a commercial business where we sell a product that we call supplier relationship management into procurement teams at, call it 50 to 2,000 employee OEMs. And essentially what that software does is it takes them out of Excel and email, and it essentially allows them to say, my supply chain is here. They're pushing data to me. So I know exactly who's in my supply chain. If I see gaps in my supply chain, I can easily find and onboard new suppliers. Then I can actually go, and when I need to actually get real work done, I can do an RFQ and I can quickly get quotes. So instead of email and all of this kind of stuff, I can actually get quotes. I can award projects. I can manage performance of POs. And then I can score my suppliers according to my criteria. So I actually have a comprehensive view of what does my supply chain look like, who is performing for me, and really like how do I optimize my supply chain operations, how do I be more agile, more flexible, et cetera. So we sell that product commercially, and then we sell a variant of that into the DoD. It's a little different in the sense that it's customized to some of the DoD acquisition programs, but essentially it's the same idea of like I have a job to be done, who is the right manufacturer in my supply chain, and so on and so forth. And that drives these larger organizations to buy from more local suppliers, which supports the mission of all of the support organizations, which gets them excited to help us recruit more suppliers, which leads to, again, more action for buyers, which is where, we make money, and this is how we exist as a business and so on. So this is our flywheel. And so in doing that, like we're a Texas company. We're strong in Texas. We've spent a lot of time with the Texas MEP, and we piloted a lot of this stuff here. But we've got kind of an interesting perspective in the sense of having worked with all of these different types of support organizations. And I would say like that it is it gets complicated quickly because support organizations like yours actually get deeply in the weeds of like certification issues, capital equipment investment decisions, access to capital, trying to figure out government, but it gets very specific very quickly. And so it's easy to kind of not understand what the tip of the spear looks like as far as helping these manufacturers grow and develop and invest and so on. But I think that role is fantastically important. And in our observation, when you look at all of these different groups that are working towards this mission, we actually think pretty highly of the MEP program. And there's some variability in different states, but specifically in Texas, like TMAC does a great job. And the way that TMAC is connected with your organization and the San Antonio, the way that like they've kind of function as an ecosystem enabler, like there's a lot of goodness there that I hope we're able to retain.
Yeah, no, I mean, TMAC has been an invaluable partner for us over the years. I don't know, it's concerning some of the programming that, may be at risk without the renewal of this program. So, we'll be working on that. We'll hopefully be able to prove the value of that and get that back in. So one of the things about Sustainment, and we've had you guys out at our Operations Summit and involved with, trying to push manufacturers onto the platform, is it's not just about going up and setting up a profile. Here's my company, here's my address, and we kind of do these industries, right? It's really about being as detailed as possible when they set up that profile. If they want to work with DoD, do I have an ITAR registration? If I want to be in aerospace, am I AS 9100 certified? On the ISO side, you can have all kinds of different ISO certifications. Have I met my CMMC requirements and things of that nature? So you had mentioned previously, even the equipment that you're using in your shops, and if, disclosing that. So I think, as we tell it to our members when they go out to set that profile up, trying to be as detailed as possible. But can you talk about, that a little bit more and provide some feedback to members and manufacturers that want to get on the platform, and what's best to make them stand out?
Yeah. No, look, it's a great question. And it has always been the case that data, like accurate data, is going to result in accurate feedback. But it's remarkable what's happened in this AI revolution here over the past couple of years. And so we're at the point, like one of the big projects we've been working on with the DoD is a family of algorithms to essentially like look at the technical requirements, like actually look at a part drawing and essentially infer from that, like, not like how to build it from like a G&M coding perspective, but like roughly like what types of equipment would you need? What types of manufacturing processes, certifications, et cetera, would you need to be able to build that part? And that's actually the basis of kind of how we drive our search algorithms. right? And so this idea like of saying, hey, I work in, our capability is machining. It's not actually that helpful to say, no, I have a 5-axis mill with the bed size of X that does this, and I have, I work at these tolerances and so on. That's actually how we can get very, very precise for both our defense and commercial customers around, again, like who is the best fit to do, this part, to build this part for me. And we're really excited about where we're going with this. I mean, and, if you think about kind of some of the things that are possible with AI, like the idea of I can say, hey, you've got these 3 suppliers that are internationally. I can actually look at those manufacturers, kind of see what they bid on and what they do and what equipment that they have. And I can say, hey, by the way, did you know that there are 3 manufacturers within 100 miles of your office that have the same characteristics that are probably likely to be effective for you? And this is one of the things that, again, I think it's really important that people provide comprehensive and accurate data in this, because this is kind of how we're trying to drive some of these onshoring decisions to be like as natural and seamless as possible. And imagine an experience where you're going out to quote and you're saying, hey, I've got 2 suppliers overseas. I just sent them an RFQ. We want to be the company that says, hey, by the way, do you want to add this company? We think they're actually going to be a good fit for you. You may not know who they are, but we're going to add them. Do you want to send the RFQ to them as well? And like do those things that are kind of like in the procurement workflows. Because again, I think that's actually where it happens, right? You can have company leadership saying, hey, we have a localization initiative, so go get supply, but then as that gets down to like a buyer who's just trying to crank through a bunch of different RFQs or POs, it actually gets like, really kind of difficult for like, what am I supposed to do with this? And we want to like push that data and push those alternative sources of supply like really naturally into their workflows to make it be like, oh, why not send that quote to a Texas manufacturer that I may not have connected yet and I may not have known they existed? So anyways, that was a long answer, but data feeds that. And so we do think that's super important.
Well, you can't have a conversation if you're in the software business without talking about AI and how that's going to work. So I like where you're going with that. And again, you kind of hit on some, specs and technical stuff that, I think is important. So again, as we're trying to push that communication out, I'm kind of thinking like if a supplier comes into the profile setup on your screen, do you guys have like a set of questions that kind of walks them through? It's like TurboTax for your tax return. It's dummy proof, but it kind of walks them through to say, do you have this? What's this specification? Which really flushes out then that data that you're looking for that AI can train on?
Yeah, no, we absolutely do. And I encourage anybody looking at this or listening to this in Texas or elsewhere to come check us out at sustainment.com. When you go through an onboarding flow, it's kind of as you explain. And we're getting to the point, too, where it's like, hey, here's my website. And then we can actually go look at that programmatically and see if there are any additional things that we can pull in to help complement your profile, and might not even be publicly posted there, but things that we can learn and infer about you. So there's a lot that we can do. And we have spent a lot of time and effort and have a great product team and design team to make that like a really user-friendly experience to go through. Because we're also very aware that in this industry, like, these are not men and women that are like sitting at their computers all day. Like, these are people that are doing the real work.
They're on the shop floor.
And so we want to be fast.
Yeah, no, and that's great. So let's talk about a couple of defining things. We'd mentioned this reshoring initiative, COVID, how that had impacted that. What did you guys learn through COVID as you were dealing with this?
Yeah, no, COVID was super formative for our company here, as we were, I think that was really, an accelerant for us in the sense that it really shined the light on this supply chain problem, right? And obviously that was when the world kind of woke up to like, hold on a second, everything is coming from where? And so there was like a more popular understanding of that. But it also exposed problems like, hey, we don't actually, as a state or as a community or as a nation, like have a way, a programmatic understanding of who's what, where, with what capabilities. And one of the anecdotes that I like to tell is like the ventilator use case. And I don't know if you remember this, but there was a huge panic around, we don't have enough ventilators. We need to save lives. Like ventilators equal saving lives. So let's get more ventilators. And you can go search on the internet all day for ventilator manufacturers, and you're not going to be very effective there. But if you say, hey, hold on a second, Like, hold on a second. Let's actually go look at the key part groupings inside a ventilator, and let's forget that and say, hey, who in the state of Texas can actually build these parts that go into a ventilator? It's like hundreds of businesses. And I think that like changed some of the thinking of like, okay, if we actually want to get here and understand who has the capability to do what, and we have technology that allows us to intelligently say, okay, these parts manufactured here are going to this assembly house here, and actually put this together as a system, there is way more capacity in the United States than people generally recognize. And you know what I mean? And China has almost been the easy button with these giant vertically integrated factories with, tens or hundreds of thousands of people working on it. So you get everything done under one roof. That's just not the American culture. Like the American culture is small businesses getting after it who are great at what they do. And the way to basically compete here is to figure out who does what, how those parts contribute to the ultimate end goal. And we're working on this with drones for the DoD. We look forward to getting into the shipbuilding problem with some of these really cool companies that are actually building modern shipyards in the state of Texas. There is a whole nother way to look at this thing. If you're able to actually say, instead of who builds this thing, like who can build the components to this, and what is an optimal way to route that requirement through a network of excellent manufacturers in the country. So there's more here, I guess, is my point. And we see a future where there actually is a national manufacturing view of who's what, who's where. There's a reserve capacity of manufacturers so that in the event we really do need to surge manufacturing for ventilators, or God forbid for something happens in terms of conflict internationally, we're able to really quickly scale up critical manufacturing needs, which is something that we've really, really been thinking about with some of our DoD customers.
Well, and I love that analogy because it really kind of highlights still the ingenuity in America to respond to a crisis, and that the ventilators, right, and how that was approached. And it was a large OEM, and I can't remember who it was, but they pivoted to do that, which was what happened during World War II, right? We had car companies that suddenly became makers of planes and everything else, and we really need to have that back in the U.S. I think we've just become so siloed in what people do that we don't understand that dual use capacity constraint. This is again where China has really excelled on that because they have super hype their economy for a commercial side, but those factories can pivot very quickly into the defense space for them. And we need to get back to that. And that's why I love this dual use concept and where DIU has gone and now the DoD waking up to that. And I think that's critical for us as we go forward in finding that ingenuity. So it's fabulous, and I appreciate that discussion. What's next? Where does Sustainment go from here?
Yeah, I mean, again, we want to continue solving problems between buyers and suppliers in the manufacturing world. That's where we get. And we actually see, if you kind of step back and look at what we're doing, is we're trying to solve tactical problems around supplier discovery, quotes, all of this stuff that's actually not rocket science. But we want to solve these tactical problems. And by doing so, we want to continue to build a picture of who's what and who's where. And so we're really focused on leaning into those tactical problems. In our DoD business, we've effectively anchored essentially a supplier discovery tool. And the next problem, once you're a supplier and you get discovered, is you're like, oh my gosh, I got to go through this onboarding process and this qualification process that's going to involve anywhere from 100 to 1,000 pieces of paper I got to fill out. And half of the, probably more candidly, but a lot of manufacturers quit the DoD process at that point. And that is a great problem that we can solve with technology. And again, there still need to be talented engineers on each end saying, hey, I qualify that part to go in a helicopter or whatever. But it's a great problem to say, hey, I'm a supplier. I've been identified as a good fit. Let me push an easy button so that I can pre-populate as much of this as I can. So we're pretty focused on that. So continuing to solve problems in that workflow. And then on the commercial side, we're getting deeper and deeper into helping companies operate their supply chains. And it's actually pretty fun to go to these trade shows and say, hey, supply chain teams, look, your accountants have an ERP system, your sales organization has a CRM system, you have Microsoft Office, what's up with that? Why don't you have a modern tool where you can actually really lean into this on a relationship basis? And so Like, we want to be the company that honors the idea that, like, my suppliers are critical relationships to me. I do not want to be abstracted from them. I don't want a marketplace. I don't want some black box where I just get a part from whatever. I need to know my suppliers. I need to trust them. In half the times, I know their families and so on. I just need to be faster. I need to be faster and more agile and more kind of aligned with their capacities in real time. And so, so you see us leaning really heavily into communications integrated with, with email and kind of just trying to be like where people are and where they work. But these are essentially the problems that we want to solve. And we already have the largest network of engaged manufacturing suppliers in the country. And we want to continue to like invest in that, continue to lean into that, and then continue to tell the story at the national level that says, hey, a la Freedom's Forge, the excellence in American manufacturing is actually not in the defense industrial base right now. The overwhelming capacity in U.S. manufacturing are these amazing commercial manufacturers that are doing great work in medical devices and in aerospace and in these other industries. And you should reach more into them. This whole contraction of like DoD dollars that used to be very broadly spread amongst dual-use companies, and now they're very concentrated in kind of defense-only companies, we should pull that back. And I think it's actually going to provide great outcomes for the DoD in terms of getting what they need quicker, faster, cheaper, et cetera. But it's also going to drive economic value and wealth into these mid-market manufacturers that will allow them to hire and invest and do the things that they need to be to like really rebuild and reindustrialize the country.
Yeah, no, and so that's great. We talk about DoD a lot, but here in Texas, especially, and what's happening, aerospace and nuclear, right? Nuclear manufacturing, the SMRs that are coming. So there's just an expansion of industry growth that's occurring. So let's kind of wrap this up and talk about where we kind of open this up a little bit with the tariffs. And I like to say I don't like to talk politics, but I like to talk policy. I understand the principle behind what the administration's trying to do with the tariffs. Is we've offshored too much of our manufacturing. We need to bring it back. Is it a carrot or stick? How do we encourage manufacturing to come back in? And I know that there's been a lot of uncertainty around that. When I talk to our members, I hear what I like to refer to as the tale of two tales. Some people are pausing right now. They don't want to make further investment because they don't know what's happening. And yet I talk to other manufacturers who say it's really been good for us right now because the amount of inquiries that we've suddenly started to get from either a domestic supplier that is trying to reshore their supply chain because of the tariff concern, or foreign companies that are now coming inbound. And in Central Texas, this, we've seen so much dramatic growth, and as manufacturers have come in, that's driven in part with Samsung, obviously, in the supply chain there. But between Korea and Taiwan and that geopolitical risk item, Japan as well, they're all starting to say we need to have a backup place, and we need to start doing investment back into the U.S. So the tariffs are as the markets are probably responding today as we're sitting here. I don't know how much my 401k and their investments have gone down today, but again, I do believe in the principle behind trying to drive some of that here. But what are your thoughts around where we're at and where you think we'll be?
Yeah, I mean, look, I guess to reflect briefly on the overall tariffs issue, a permissive industrial policy where we were fully optimized towards, allow people to put tariffs on us and don't put, that whole world maybe made sense in, the time in which the Soviet Union had fell, the United States was we were a unipower, whatever you call that kind of global environment.
It's that piece, right? That's the part of the globalization is the Soviet Union had to come down, and we thought, well, through economic prosperity, if we move that around the world, then we avoid these conflicts.
Well, we've transitioned into a world where that's just not the case anymore. Yeah. This is not a unipolar world. So we're in a world where you have an ascendant power in China who, we can argue whether or not they're a revisionist power, but they're actually approaching the point. I mean, one estimate I saw recently is that they will have half of the manufacturing capacity in the world in the early 2030s. And that actually only equals as a share of global manufacturing where U.S. was after the Second World War and where the United Kingdom was in the Industrial Revolution. Like, this is very, very significant here. And so the policies that worked in this world obviously are not the same policies that you would in place now. And so, like, I actually find that this industrial policy and the idea that we need to be more deliberate around encouraging industry in this country and supporting our companies and so on, like, I think that is actually a very bipartisan issue. Now, the way that that's impacted into tariffs and monetary policy, we can argue over like who should be tariffed and what the timeline should be all day, but like, this is the world in which we are in. Like, we are in a world in which it is competitive. We need to protect American interests, and like, the current administration is clearly getting after that. Now, if you're a business looking at this, like, you need the ability to be flexible. Like, you need to be fast, you need to be agile, you need to be flexible. And especially when kind of tariffs are going up and down and, you know, and like things are changing pretty rapidly. The answer to that is to have alternative sources of supply that you trust, that you have vetted, that you can get quotes from, so that you're able to pivot and react and actually look at kind of multiple suppliers for different parts. Yeah. And you've got a prior generation of supply chain executives who sort of grew up on the like, let's go as cheap as possible, we don't care. Right? So go low cost labor, one source of supply, optimize purely for cost. And clearly now, like, you need to be optimizing for some balance of both cost and resiliency in your supply chain. And, you know, and that candidly has been a driver of a lot of interest in our software, because this is essentially what we do. And so we're not specifically just like a search engine for suppliers. We're like a way to be really agile and get multiple quotes to see like, who actually is aligned and who can get us what we need when we need it at the price that we need. And it's usually a function of having, like, again, multiple people that you trust that you can get quotes from quickly, maybe in different geographies, maybe not. But like, that's how like we suggest companies be thinking about this, right? So in an uncertain world, you need optionality. Full stop, yep. Right? You need optionality, and you need the ability to move quickly. And so, you know, I don't think that this is going away. And candidly, if the next administration, if this flips to a Democratic administration, they're probably going to run at industrial policy differently, but they're not going to drop it, because this is a reality of the world in which we operate. Like, it is a competitive world. We do need to emphasize American interests here, and American interests run through our industry. It is what it is.
Yeah, no, I agree. There's no turning back at this point in time, and I think we've realized that. So I hope that we'll continue to see that, but we've got other issues that we need to deal with, right? You can't just build a factory overnight and bring that stuff back. You've got to have a workforce that's developed on that. And again, this is the space where ARMA is living and trying to help drive that developed workforce and work with members that want to expand and grow and do that. So Bret, this has been a great discussion. I want to say thank you again for coming out today. I love mission-driven purpose, which is what Sustainment is, and why you guys are in that space. So thank you for creating that and helping with this process as we begin to reshore that, and spending some time today with us. So I'll leave you with the last word.
Yeah, no, look, I appreciate it. And I have a lot of respect for manufacturing support organizations that work at the local level. Again, this is a very relational, local business here, and I respect what you guys do, and I appreciate the partnership. I actually think this has been a great experience, and we've loved getting to know a lot of your members. And just to plug our business, like, check us out at sustainment.com. So if you're a supplier, join for free, make a great profile per Kevin's comments. If you're a larger organization, we would love to sell software to your procurement team that helps you basically go faster. If you're wrestling with this whole tariffs issue and what should we do, we should definitely share our perspective on that, because we're kind of in the trenches with a few businesses working through that right now. But no, grateful for the opportunity, and thank you for your time.
Yeah, no, so it's great. Again, Central Texas manufacturing, all the unique stuff that's happening here. We're fortunate to have Sustainment headquartered here, but they are here nationally. So anybody who might be outside the state of Texas who's listening to this right now, if you haven't had any engagement with Sustainment, you can find them. You guys have been really busy on the expo circuit here. I think you're flying around the country every single week, but find them at an expo, or just reach out to them directly and get engaged with them. So again, with that, thank you, and we appreciate you tuning into the Manufacturing Austin podcast, and we'll see you next time.